Recording is started. You can continue.
All right, perfect. So today we're gonna cover Dockers and containers. I know you've heard quite a bit about it, so I wanted to kind of go over some of the little things that they're not documented as well, but it's kind of some things that as you use them, um, you need to know like how they work and stuff, and it'll make things a little bit easier to understand as you develop with them. So yeah, we went over kind of who I am. Um, with everything, 5 times Psychor MP, work for RBA. I'm based in Chicago, but they're based in Minneapolis, and been working with Psychor over 10 years. So presentation goals are going to be learn what Dockers and containers are, how to get started with them, and just have a better understanding why developers can benefit from them. So yeah, Sitecore has a ton of um, things out there, GitHubs and stuff, for examples. One of the important ones, though, is this ones with the Sitecore tags. And let me open it here. So this is like the repository for every version and OS of different Docker images that they have out there. So if you ever get an error that says name is missing or whatever, usually if you look here, you can see what the actual name is with these tags. There's a lot of information on here, and it keeps growing because there are several different versions of stuff. So, but it's good to know where this is at. So, just because, yeah, if you run an issue, so here's like 10.2 Sitecore and tells you the parameters you need and all that. So, all right, so going on to the next. So Sitecore has a ton of GitHubs out there now where they have examples. They have this Docker image one, this Docker examples. The Docker images one has like a bunch of different flavors. And today I'm grabbing the core one. But that has examples for your traditional MVC. It has headless, and so on forth. But pretty simple examples. They have like a basic company in there, and that's the one I'll show you that we did today. Conabos is another company that has some pretty good examples, and they do some custom stuff. And then the one of the latest ones is this Sitecore Demo Edge. I highly recommend installing that, especially not just because of Docker, because it's a full site for headless. So you can actually play around with it, and it installs like the actual working site and everything. And it also has some of the new offerings from Sitecore, like CDP, in there as well. So the demo team put that together. So I recommend that one for sure. There is another demo one too that's traditional MVC as well, but all of them are in Docker. So you traditionally can't just install them like you normally would. You'd have to use Docker, but it's pretty easy to get up and running. So requirements on Docker, you need lots of memory. Docker itself is just a memory hog. I always say cleanest environment possible. So if somebody's been developing in the same environment in their laptop and they have multiple sites, you might run into different issues just because you might have some ports that are being blocked that Docker needs. For instance, IIS uses 443, which Docker needs. So they always say when you're running Docker and installing something, you got to do an IIS stop. But one way around that is to use a VM. And the advantage with the VM is that you can pass that around too. You can get it up and running, and then someone else can copy, just like a traditional VM. But you can install Docker on any environment. You don't have to use a VM. It's just you have less conflicts if you have a VM. So yeah, so this is just the overview. Docker Desktop, Visual Studio, and PowerShell. Some of the things that would be missing that's in a traditional install would be like SQL Server, which that gets installed as an image. So stuff like that that you would normally need for Docker, for Sitecore, will get installed with Docker, which is kind of nice. Same thing with Solar is another thing where it's always a little not complicated, but you run into a lot of issues when installing Solar. With Docker, that installs it for you and configures it for you and everything. So, this is basically all you need to get it up and running. And I'll show you these files too, but I have these in the presentation just in case like something else didn't work. But behind the scenes, you usually have compose files and Docker files. So all these compose files, you get to pick and choose which one you want to run. You got the one is Docker compose override, and there's just Docker compose. So there's always the regular file and then the override file. And they have different flavors, obviously, of Sitecore. There's XM and there's XP. So, like in a typical Sitecore GitHub, they let you install which one you want. So normally the default is going to be just the regular Docker compose, and then the override. So compose is like your typical out of the box stuff, components. The override is anything extra you want to install. And just particular note, one of the things I liked about installing with Docker is, for example, we had a project that needed SXA. And normally that would be a separate component, or you got to choose it when you install a Sitecore site. With Docker, it's just specified in one of the override files, and that just shows you where, it says, "Hey, I need this." So it makes it a lot easier to install because then you have everything at the beginning. Let me show you like Visual Studio Code here. Show you one of the YAML files. Expand this. So this is a typical YAML file. This is the one I used for the site today. You'll see this Trafic, which is kind of like the version of IIS for containers. So you see it installs Redis, MS SQL, Solar. The Solar init, anything with an init, those only run once, and those are to actually do the installation. So you'll see that container power down, but it's used to actually get Solar up and running. So this is just the typical install defaults. So there's your CD and CM. All these environments I'll show you, or all these strings, I'll show you where those come from. So the override here is anything extra you want to put in here. You have a solution, so it does compile and deploy solution as you put together. But I'll show you how to publish with the solution later on. In this case, they have renderings that they want to deploy. Here's MS SQL. Here's some more settings on there. Some more Solar settings. CD and CM. CM is definitely want to look at. Well, CD too, but these volumes are very important to kind of get to know what those mean. Basically, what volumes are is a mapping from your local inside to the container image. So in the container image, they have a C deploy, a C inet pub, and a C license. And then these variables here, I'll show you where those are set. Those correspond to a local drive on your directory. So they're kept in sync. There's the dev tools. We'll get into that more later, but all this is kind of, you'll see a lot of stuff traditional, but you'll see how it integrates with the image. So there was a lot of stuff that was included to makes it the transition to this type of development environment pretty simple. Then there's this Docker file that kind of gives the overview instructions on what to run. You got MS build to build a solution, directories, and then here's some of the copy stuff from, what you want to copy from your local to anything extra copy from your local to out to the image, the container image. Second instructions, and this can be changed as well. There's different Docker files, and you can do them in certain directories. So like this could be modified to do some TDS stuff as well. So for an example, and they do have examples out there how to do that if you use TDS. So let's move it on. So that kind of gives you an overview what you typically would do. And if you're doing a new project, it's pretty easy to do. You would just get one of the GitHub examples and start with that from Sitecore. But if it's existing project, you'd want everything you need in there for that project, that type of site. So if you're doing an XP, you'd want the YAML files for that and the settings. And SXA, you'd want that defined as well. But it's nice because it gives you that instructions. And one thing to keep in mind too with this, like if some reason your development environment goes bad, running and getting Docker back up again, it'll notice and say, hey, this needs SXA, so it'll reinstall it if it needs to fix it or anything like that. So it is kind of nice to have that option. So one of the things I want to talk about is the environment file. This is the example. And this is what you would see typically out of the box. It has the SXA version in this type. It has the Sitecore version, Horizon. In this case, it's being installed. You can put any parameters you want in here. Like right now, it's defaulted the SQL SA password, and I'll show you that when it's run. There's Sitecore license. So the Sitecore license is going to be pointing to your local. And then here's your deploy path and data path. So those pertain back to that YAML file where we were doing the volumes. Switch back to that real quick so you can see that. So this local path, deploy path, and then license folder, that all is defined in this environment here. So you see Docker deploy, here's the license. So those are the variables. So you definitely don't want like a specific CED drive because you want this to be generic enough where it'll pick up from any drive that you're running this from. So typically, going back to presentation, this is what it'll look out of the box. And then to get this up and running, you want to run this init. This comes with any Docker GitHub. You'll see it. It's the init PS1. It has defaults in there for passwords and everything, but you can specify passwords in that environment file if you want a specific one. Yeah, as long as it's something you remember, you can always look it up too and see what it is. Because after it runs, so you'd run this, you specify where your license is on your local. And then what happens is you'll see the Sitecore ship, and this will run. So this does a couple things. The big thing is it installs the certificates for you. And if you've ever done any type of Sitecore installation, the certificates sometimes can get corrupted or not work. This does that for you. It sets all the variables, sets all the passwords. Does a bunch. It doesn't take long to run. It also does all the requirements, so it'll import any Docker tools for Sitecore, and then it does everything for you, and then makes the certificates, and then you're all set up and running. And that's usually you would run that once the first time you ever install a Docker. So anything you run, if you want to do any examples off of Sitecore's GitHub, you would run that first, no matter what you do. So after that, it gets filled in. So now you got like the encryption keys, everything that was in the file to get this up and running is set. So you're done at this point, but here's the password is 12345 for SQL SA password. That's defaulted in that init.ps1 script. And then the nice thing too, it's like this is already being set up for you. You can set up whatever you want. If you want, you can override the parameters. But and I'll show you how to get the SQL Server from a container too as well. All right, so the next step is to just actually run Docker, and this is what's gonna grab all your images from the Sitecore repository and install them install them in your container. So there's a couple ways to do this, and you're gonna see. Always read the README and the GitHub stuff because it has changed. Typically, you would type in just Docker compose up-d, and then it would take those YAML files, do the instructions, and do the install. You can, if you just wanted to do a certain flavor, you can do Docker compose -f, and then you would just do the path for the other override. So if you wanted a different flavor of Sitecore, like this one's XM, or you can just rename the XM files to Docker compose and use those. That works as well. But typically, once you start that, it goes through all this different things. It's pulling from the Sitecore repository and installing stuff. And I'll show you. I did this before I set this up, just in case it's not something didn't work. But I'll show you how we did local site here. But you'll see it's 10.2 right now, and then it's pulling for Solar init. So that's any init file. There's MS SQL init. So the init file in this example are the ones that are actually configuring all the actual SQL Server and the Solar containers. So those only run once after done. But yeah, you'll see different images here, and I'll show you when we get to the real example. But when you see already exists, you might see that if, like, let's say you ran this, you would usually run Docker compose again if you want your environment up and running, and it'll check for changes. And if the container image already exists, it's not going to override it. So your changes are always safe. But let's say something got corrupted, you can delete the actual image, and then it'll just pull it again and reinstall it. So it's kind of nice. Something that's kind of new that's come up when installing, it'll get to a point, and then it'll want access to the offline access in the Sitecore API for login. So this will usually pop up in a browser, and you'll see in PowerShell it'll ask you, hey, I need authorization. So then you go here, you log in with your Sitecore credentials, which is in that environment file, and then you just check these and say yes, allow, and then it'll finish installation. So in part of the container, and I'm gonna bring up Docker since we have it up and running here. You got images, you got ports, and then you can also browse stuff too. And let me bring up Docker so you can actually see this. Okay. So I have this up and running right now. So here's a container. This is Prune Meetup. Here's all your other stuff that you need for your local Sitecore site. And think of this, look at it as like a Swiss Army knife or a deck of cards where you're just pulling on what you need. So here's that Solar init. It's not running because it only needed to run once to get Solar up and running. Redis This typically defaulted install. I don't know how much that's actually used, but it usually gets installed. ID server for logging in, CDCM, rendering, and Trafic. And now you'll see, depending on which one you download from Sitecore, you might see more or less images here, but this is typically what you would see. And I also should mention too, try to get, if you're going to install Docker, you haven't installed it before, there is a bug with the latest version. So I think you just want 4.6, I think. So don't upgrade if you, yeah, that's asking me to upgrade, but I don't think there's been a fix for it. So, I'm on version 4.5.1, which definitely works. So, yeah, if you do go in there, don't upgrade yet to the latest version, the 4.8, because I don't think they fixed the bug yet. Because Docker is a third-party software, it's not Sitecore's. So typically, hope you can see that there's these ports under here. You got MS SQL port, Solar port 8984, and there's Trafic 443. So that's why it's important. IIS can't run, otherwise this will crash. So just to show you something cool, you got these tools here on the side. This first one will open up in a browser. This one will open like a command line window. So like Solar here, we'll click on that and it'll open here. So there it is. So now the cool thing about this is, here's the indexes. This is running in its own image. You're not installing it with a bunch of other Solar servers. There's no port conflicts. This is just running inside the container. It's doing its own thing. It works for that version of Sitecore you're doing. So, if you install multiple sites, sometimes you run into issues with indexes and stuff and Solar versions. So, with Docker containers, you don't have to worry about that. So SQL, you're probably wondering, so I did say earlier you don't have to install SQL Server, but you do want the tools if you ever need to find it here. You might want the management studio. Just if you wanted to access that database. So it's running in here, it's running in that container. But if there's something you need to manipulate in the back end, you can actually get to that. And I'll show you that real quick here. SQL Server's coming up. It's pretty easy to do. And I want to show you that too, because like some people think, well, how am I getting to SQL Server if it's running in this container? But it's really easy to do. So the server name is going to be your local host and 14330 usually, and that corresponds to the port here, 14330. Grab, okay, I don't remember my password, so I can just get it from here. So I'll copy that. And then there's SQL Server. This is running from the container. It's not running, locally on my desktop. I don't see all the different Sitecore sites. Let's say you had multiple clients, you would see like all the different sites there. This is just running for that inside that container in an image and just for my Sitecore site that I'm working on. All right, let's go back here. Let me show you one more thing too. Actually, I'll show you a couple more things here. It's in my presentation, but I like to show it physically here. So back to that command line argument. So if you go to CM here and you do the CLI, it opens a command line window here and it points to the inet w root. Now, this is not pointing to your local, this is pointing inside the image. So we did directory. Here's your typical, I mean, this should look familiar to you. This is a Sitecore site running again inside an image in a container, not in your local dev instance. I mean, technically it is in your local, but it's in a container. So then let me show you something else here. Visual Studio also has something too that makes it a little bit easier to, oh, so I got to sign in first. Okay. So Visual Studio, obviously it's, Microsoft has fall in for the containers as well. So that also has a, as soon as it loads up here, that also has a browser as well for the containers. I guess one of the things that's kind of a limit. So let's say we click on CM and we can go to files here and it'll show you what's in the container. One of the limits of this though, and just anything that you do, you can't really edit a file directly in a container image. So that is a limit. So that is kind of frustrating because like if you just wanted to make a quick change, you couldn't just go in here and edit it and stuff. Not yet, but it's kind of secured in that way. So, you know, sometimes in a site you want to just test something before you deploy it. It gets a little bit tougher with this because yeah, you can download any of these files that are in here. But you have to download it. Maybe there's a better way, but you have to download it, edit it, and then you have to use PowerShell to upload it back into the container. There's no like copy function unless that's changed, but no. So that is one limit right now, and it is done for security with containers because you don't want to just do random stuff, but they are pretty locked down as far as that go. You do need, if you do need to want to do a quick change, you do have to use PowerShell. But there is a way to do it. Deploy real easy because Sitecore has a bunch of tools. You know, show you how those work here. So what it comes with when you install Docker is a bunch of tools that Sitecore provides. This watch one's important, and I'll show you why in a little bit. But what the watch one does is that looks for any changes in your local, and then it deploys it back out to the container. There's a bunch of other stuff. There's this entry points. This is what's working with the YAML files to get to coordinate everything being uploaded into the directory. So this development PS1 does a lot of the work that you normally that's behind the scenes to upload and keep things in sync. But yeah, typically I don't know if you'd want to change it. You can. There are examples out there where people have changed these files, but these are the ones that usually come with Sitecore that helps you get up and, you know, makes the transition a little bit easier to deploy and everything. So yeah, but that's what's you can view everything in here, see what's in there with this, but it's just a little bit tougher to change and stuff. So if you want to change one file. All right, let me go back to the presentation. So yeah, so we kind of covered this. This is what the containers and images look like. Um, so we talked about the database, a little bit how the process works. So let's talk a little bit about the getting changes to the container image. I know I brushed upon that, but let's talk about that real quick. Let me go bring back up Visual Studio here. Open up project solution. Sure. Yeah, let me find the right one here. That's the one. Okay. So here's that repository I was talking about earlier, where they do have examples, Unicorn, TDS, Next.js, which is the headless. And then today we're just using the ASP.NET Core. It's the simplest one. But let me open up Basic Company. So this is one of the things where I was like, okay, how does this work? How do I get changes into an image? It's kind of like I'm kind of missing that part of um, doing this because I need to make changes. I got to get them out there. But with all those tools of PowerShell stuff, it makes it real simple to do. Let's see this one. Close this and that. It's freezing up a little here. Sorry. Oh, okay. Visual Studio just restarted on me. All right, let's try this again. I think this was set up, but let me make sure. Maybe not. Um, but typically, what you want to do is when you publish, you'd want to do a folder. In this folder, is usually going to be your local Docker deploy folder. So you would see. So usually, I think it's deploy that it's pointing to, and you can do just Docker deploy and do the absolute path, but usually they have that set up. Um, but what you can do is you can publish there, and then it'll publish out to the actual website. So show you here. Hopefully this works. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, but All right, so double check here and see where it's pointing to. Because this is the part where you're going to want um, the tools that I showed you earlier. It's watching a certain directory. So if you publish in there, it's gonna take that and then bring it up to the inside the container. So let me double check the container here. So we can view it, make sure. It's probably already published in there because it does already compile the solution, deploy it the first time you run it. But let's make sure the process works okay. But yeah, so right now it already at one point when it did the solution, it deployed it, but we want to do um, different changes here. Let's see. Might copy a file manually and show you, but let's just do the publish now. All right, so publish succeeded. The deploy folder, bin, app config. And it should hopefully copy those out the container. It's already there, so you might not see it, but what I want to try to do and show you a typical file how it would. All right, let's try this. Maybe this will be faster if I do it this way. I want to show you how the magic works here, so let's try this. Hopefully this worked. This didn't work in my last demo, but normally you would publish and then that watch script would bring up any changes. But publishing, as you can see, though, it's going to be typical of what you normally do. Normally, you just publish the whole project, and then it would just deploy everything. So it's going to be typically the same thing that you're doing. So that whole part hasn't changed. Um, but you're not publishing. The site's not running from your local drive; it's running from that image. So you publish to your deploy folder, and that the PowerShell scripts that come with Docker from Sitecore will copy those files into the container. So that part is one of the main differences between that which you would normally publish. Let's see. So hopefully that copies it over. Can't guarantee it'll work, but we'll check here. Copy it. Maybe it's in the wrong. Over here. Let's try that. Bear with me here. I want to show you that this does work. It should be the right deploy folder. All right, cool. So it looked like it kicked off anyways when I built it. So it did copy this deploy folder, and then it did copy it. Here are the files that I built, but I'm trying to get my test page to actually go out there. Maybe it's not picking it up because it's HTML, or it's not picking up because of these folders, but something to double check. If you do run into this issue, it is working. I'm just trying to get my test file out there. If you look at the YAML files, that'll tell you this where it's pointing to. So my local deploy, well, it says platform. So deploy path, Docker deploy, and there should be a platform. Oh, okay, here we go. Okay. So like I was saying, everything's different. So in this example, the actual deploy folder is different. It's in platform. A lot of times it just looks like the regular website, but hopefully now it'll work. So I'm going to paste this test page HTML in there. So this would be typically like what you would do. You'd publish your local. So let's look at their deploy folder. Ah, and there it is. So let's go refresh. There it is. Okay. So see, it does work. So typically, make sure you have the right deploy folder, because wherever you publish to, that's where it's going to deploy to. In this case, they already set it up where you just build a project and it'll deploy the files to that platform folder. I've seen different folders. I've seen where it's just under data, but always keep in mind, don't make the same mistake I did. Make sure you check the path, or assume, you can change the path in this override if you want, but in this case it was under platform, but I've seen it under like a website, or it looked, so you can call it whatever you want. Anyways, moving on. All right, so we just talked about the volumes and how that works. We talked about the Visual Studio solution. It looks the same, but it just has the Docker stuff added to it. And if you start a new solution, I would recommend using one of the GitHub examples that they have out there. If you have an existing one, I would just compare it to the GitHub example and add what you need to it. We talked about connecting to SQL Server. We'll go into this last. Let me show you the PowerShell stuff that I ran earlier to get our site. up and running. So scroll to the beginning. There's a lot of stuff that happens with this, but you'll typically see all this stuff here. So it starts here. My environment file was already set up. So in this case, we have an up that PS1, which if you look at that file, it's the same thing. It has Docker Compose in there to get it up and running. But in this case, it's also wrapped around a bunch of other stuff too, to do checks and everything, and to set like everything up that you need. But typically, in a lot of instances, you just run Docker Compose. This also also looks at the logs too as it's running, opens the site for you and everything. So you'll see stuff like this wrapped around newer versions. But for the most part, it's just running Docker Compose, getting the environment up and running, but then it does wraparound checks and everything. So, because this is, it's an evolving thing, so there's different things being added. But yeah, definitely whatever GitHub repository you have, definitely check the README file. In this case, you would run up.ps1 to get everything installed up and running. But and typically you'll see building containers. It's gonna look for the images, grab them from the Sitecore repository, what it needs. It's gonna build a solution, your local solution, deploy that as well initially. Do all the required NuGet stuff. So you'll see here's the NuGet. And if you've ever done a CIF install, you see a lot of this stuff too, but this is actually installing inside the container with the images and everything. So yeah, this thing will keep going. You'll see different messages. It's pretty quick. It scrolls through pretty fast. So grab anything it needs. There's these tooling images. That's going to be a lot of the development scripts I showed you earlier that comes with the Sitecore stuff. And then typically you get to the end here where it'll say starting Sitecore environment. It checks each one. Some things are dependent on other things, like Traffic is dependent on CM usually getting started. You can disable that if you want, but usually they're dependent on each other working. And then when I explained earlier, you get that authorization. So when you get to all this point here, you'll see this authorization pending. That's where it opens up the browser and it'll have you log in to give you access. And then towards the end here, it's just rebuilding the indexes for you and everything. And now this is all wrapped up. So you don't, some of the installations you do won't do this, but that up.ps1 in this case, which is a good example, I would probably recommend that anyways to use for the Sitecore examples. It'll do that stuff for you here, and then it opens a site for you, and then there's these log files too, and this command shows you all the log files, what's going on with the container. So this is log files within the images. So if something's rebuilding or whatever, you'll see it here. So right now it's still building. These are out there. There's the indexes up again. Because sometimes the first time you run this, it's not always ready. So you might have to run it again. So if you do get errors at first, just run the PS1 again. And then the site's up and running. And let me show it to you here. In this example, I'll share a thing there. So it's basic company, so it's just a pretty simple site. We have to log in. So here's the actual Sitecore site that's running within the container. So that loads there. And one other thing too, I wanted to show you here. If find it. Um, so locally here, this is my local. They have these different SQL databases that you have: Experience, Master, Sessions, Web, Core. Um, doesn't happen often, but every once in a while, something will get corrupted in somebody's database, just like a normal Sitecore environment. You can actually take one that's working from someone else's environment and copy it into this directory. And those Sitecore tools that come with Docker will actually run. And notice that you have a change here, and then it'll upload it into the container. And so the issue will usually be fixed. Like someone with this project I was working on, their core database got corrupted for whatever reason. So it was just a matter of copying these two files, and then it was all set. And then same thing with the master here. Like let's say you synced a bunch of stuff, you have this huge database, you can just copy the LDF of an MDF file here, and it'll attach it to the SQL Server container. So kind of a quick thing to do. But yeah, here's the basic company site. A lot of people say that Docker is a little bit faster than your typical install, of what I've heard. It's caching right now because it's a new site, but it's probably true because it's not using as resource intensive. It's just taking what it's need. But you have all your tools. I mean, it's a full Sitecore site. So there's basic company. So yeah, this is one example. This is the .core example, but they have other examples as well. So out there, the Edge one is I would really recommend installing that if you haven't done headless and stuff. So or just do their regular demo platform, which is typical MVC. So yeah, so your site's up and running. Development there, you can publish. So everything up to this point works the same, except everything's in this container, and here's all your stuff that you need for your website development. And then so a lot of times you might have more than one site you're working on, or just it's probably a good measure. You want to do a Docker compose down, and what that'll do is shut off all the containers, make sure everything's good, and then it'll just turn everything off. But let's see, I'll show you. We'll do that real quick here live. They do have, in this particular project, they have, let's see, where is it at? Maybe they don't have a Docker compose down. Or, yeah, some will have like a down PS1 or something else, but in this case, it doesn't have one. So I can just do a Docker compose and then down. So what's going to happen? It's going to take all those images and then just shut off. It's good to do if you're not working on it for a long time, or you want to bring up another site. I've had issues running multiple sites out of Docker, so that's why it's good measure to. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, I had a message that you couldn't hear me. But yeah, so then if you want to bring it up again, you just type in that up.ps1 and then it'll go through the steps. Now, because we already installed it, it's going to be a lot quicker. So the images are there already. Initially, I'd say like to get the site up and running without anything there, probably like less than 30 minutes. But now that it's already running, it'll just run through the steps, figure any changes, try to deploy the solution again. But yeah, typically it's a little bit faster to bring it up each time if you need to. Um, so yeah, while that's running, did you guys have any questions? Hopefully I didn't confuse you. Hope you have a little bit better understanding of it.
No, I don't see any questions in the chat here. So guys, do you have any questions?
And I definitely would try to install one of the examples out there that Sitecore has, and then just get familiar with it. But I have like using this versus going back to sometimes a traditional environment. I've noticed the Docker stuff is much faster to get up and running. We recently did a project with SXA and new site and everything with Docker, and it definitely was faster to get up and running. We didn't run into a lot of the installations we normally did. I think we ran into one person had a lot of conflicts, so we ended up just creating a VM for him, and then that worked out fine. So, but yeah, I mean, you hear a lot about it, but it really is pretty cool. The stuff I showed you today is just the basic stuff, but some people have really like you still run the same stuff, but some people have done stuff where they and you'll see if you download the examples, it'll create like all the Sitecore items for you and everything. So it's kind of cool. And then like if you did the hackathon, when you ran Docker for your repository, it actually took like the MVP site and copied it into your local. So um, you can do a lot of cool stuff, but it definitely where Sitecore is going um, in Azure too. I don't know, if it's 100% yet, but they're definitely container deployments are getting more and more popular. So, um, you'll see a lot of stuff like that. So, it's definitely going that way. And you don't have to. You can have Docker as your local environment, and then just deploy like you traditionally do. So there's no requirement that Azure or wherever you're deploying, Amazon has to be a container environment if your local is, but um, eventually they'll kind of match one for one or whatever. So yeah, no questions.
Yeah, seems so.